to From Another Angle, a Carnegie Council podcast. I'm Hilary Sutcliffe and I'm on the board of the Carnegie Council for AI and Equality. In this series, I get to talk to some of today's most innovative thinkers who take familiar concepts like democracy or human nature, regulation, or even the way we think about ourselves and show them to us from a quite different angle. What really excites me about these conversations is the way they challenge our fundamental assumptions. Certainly for me, and I hope for you too, their fresh thinking makes me see the world in a new way and opens up a whole raft of possibilities and ways of looking at the future. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Gabriella Braun. She is an author and the director of Working Well, a specialist consultancy firm which uses psychoanalytic and systemic thinking to help leaders and teams understand the hidden truths of their behaviour at work. Gabriella's wonderfully readable book is called All That We Are. I felt it wasn't quite showing us human nature at work from another angle. Rather, reading it, I was reminded of those illustrations you get at the physio in the doctor's surgery, where you see people stripped of their skin and see their muscles and sinews and nerves and blood vessels underneath. And what came to mind for me is the book shows us stripped of all the outward trappings of status and power, even our skills and experience. And Gabriella shows us what's going on beneath, what we're concealing, often even from ourselves, in the way we act and react to what happens to us at work. So I see this as ourselves at work, not quite from another angle exactly, but rather in a different dimension. So Gabriella, welcome, and thank you so much for sparing the time to join us.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Let's just start by telling us about your book, because it's quite a different book. Tell us where it came from and what made you want to write it.
Well, where it came from is my work with very differing organisations and seeing differing organisations and people. Both I work with groups and teams, and I work with individuals in coaching as well. So the groups and teams is not coaching, it's workshops, etc. And what I saw increasingly was distress and damage in the workplace. People very stressed, mental health deteriorating. We know the statistics are very poor. And what I also realised increasingly and got a bee in my bonnet about was that people, consultants like me who apply psychoanalytic and systemic thinking, really have been very poor at letting the world at large, mainstream organisations know that we exist and know how we can help. As if we expect them to find us rather than we go and adapt to them and speak in their language. And that's how it came about, really. That's why I wanted to write it. And I really felt that there weren't other books like that aimed at a mainstream audience. So that was my reason for doing it and how I did it.
Because it's a very engaging book. It's a series of stories based on your experience. And it was almost like reading a work of fiction in that you're really intrigued by the characters and what happens to them and what happens in the end. And I'm reading it just dying to know what happens to people and what happens in these workplaces and to these individuals. So tell us about what made you decide to do this particular format and a little bit more about it.
Well, that's a great question. And thank you for picking up the storytelling. As humans, we tell stories to make sense of ourselves and make sense of our world. And we always have done. You know, stories have been drawn on caves. It's how we cope as human beings, how we do interpret the world and ourselves. So it seemed to me that storytelling was a good way of engaging a reader. I didn't want an academic book. I didn't want a book full of theory. There actually is quite a lot of theory, but it's told as part of the stories. And then there are notes at the back that you can read if you want more theory, or if you want to know where to go to for more theory. But also what I really wanted, because I was trying to talk about emotion and feelings a lot, I realized that the book needed to speak to people emotionally. I didn't want it just to touch their brain. I wanted it to reach other parts. And I think stories are the way that we do that. That's how, like with fiction, and like you've just said, which is wonderful, that you get engaged with the character. You want to know what happens. And it's that emotional journey that you go on as a reader that for me will give more voice to the lessons or the voice I'm trying to bring to this book. I have to say, at the beginning of writing it, I simply didn't have the skills. And I had to really put a lot of time and a lot of effort into learning how to write stories.
That you've made it look absolutely effortless. I was reading it thinking, gosh, I'll never be one of those. But tell us some of the stories. I mean, tell us, I think it's some of the people you talk about in very stressful situations, and also some very ordinary situations, and somebody's boss is a bit of an idiot, and somebody's having a breakdown, and the things that we find in everyday life, in everyday workplace life. Just talk to us about the stories and about some of the lessons that you've learned from this experience you've had over the years.
I think some of them are a bit extreme, like one story called Losing the Plot, where the board of the company literally loses the plot and nearly pulls the company down. It's not at all extreme that teams lose the plot. That happens a lot. But for them to get to the point of nearly pulling the company down, that is more extreme. But other stories, exactly as you say, are really ordinary, like the man who is constantly put upon by his organisation and can't say to them, I can't do anymore. I actually am not really coping with what you're asking me to do. We all recognise that, don't we? Someone who appears to say yes or does say yes because they don't say no, and the organisation just loads and loads and loads them up until they're at breaking point. So that's quite ordinary. An ordinary tale of someone who, we don't call it this, but people will recognise it. It's actually sibling rivalry, which we think about in the family. But in this one story where somebody gets very heated about her colleague, who appears to get more attention from the boss, who appears to get the better projects given from the boss. And actually what we realise is that the heat is because unconsciously the colleague reminds her of her sister. And when they were growing up, she always felt that her sister was her parents' favourite. And again, that might not be your experience, the listener's experience at work, but they will probably recognise those things where they get particularly hot under the collar. And it's actually quite ordinary that a colleague is really pressing our buttons, or a boss is driving us nuts. Some of those stories are just those ordinary things. But what they do that's not ordinary is dig down to show why it's happening, what's being triggered, what's going on, and how we all have buttons that get pushed. And if we could understand those better, we can be a bit more in charge of what happens to us rather than at the mercy of whichever button somebody happens to push.
Well, so when we talked beforehand, I was slightly resistant to this notion that our past defines us. And this word defines us. I was thinking, I'm not defined by my past, I'm not, I'm free. But actually, I've been thinking about it since, and I'm reading your book again. It's how we are defined by our past is very profound and very, very surprising. And now looking into that myself, and into that, in fact, from people around me and people I'm working with, it does help you be more empathetic about the way you behave yourself and you react yourself and to others. And tell us a little bit more about that, how you found this self-knowledge and the knowledge of the team, this sort of understanding that they get about how our past really does drive us. Tell us a bit more.
I'm glad you said that it did start to resonate. And I think often people do react exactly as you do. It seems such a difficult concept, doesn't it? We're defined by the past. And I've had people who I realised what they were thinking was, if I'm defined by my past, I'm completely stuck. And
Yeah.
somebody actually said to me, well, if I had an alcoholic father, I'm going to be an alcoholic then. And I was saying, no. Being defined by your past means you're defined by an experience of an alcoholic father. It doesn't mean you will become an alcoholic. And in fact, the more you understand the impact of the alcoholic father on you, the less likely you are to become an alcoholic. So, and teams and individuals in coaching also realize that it's the understanding that actually gives us more agency over our own futures, rather than just repeating something because it's very unconscious and we're not aware of it. But we are all inevitably imprinted by our past. And I talk in the book, and it took me a long time to get to this. I had no idea when I started writing that I'd end up telling a lot of my own story. But actually, in the end, I thought, well, I have to show some of my own story. Otherwise, I'm saying, you people reading my book are imprinted by your past, but of course I'm not. And I really didn't want to be doing that. So I tell, as you know, quite a lot of my own story, including that my parents had traumatized past histories, Holocaust in the background. My mother was finally diagnosed as bipolar late in life. And all of that is part of what imprints on me. You know, having a mother with serious mental health difficulties is not straightforward, and definitely had an effect on me. I think partly the effect made me very curious about the mind and what happens in the mind. That was the positive effect, but there were certainly negative effects as well. Understanding them means I'm more able to deal with them. So I know much more what my triggers are, and I don't have to go there all the time. They're part of me, but they're not ruling me. That's the difference. They define who I am, but they don't define how I react to everything.
Yes, that's fantastic learning. Can we look at it from the point of leadership? Because I liked you moved in the book from talking about leaders to talking about those in teams. And one thing I quite liked was the thought of looking at the super boss actually as a little child whose father never thought he was good enough. That slightly humanizes a leader, but also from a leader point of view, seeing people in all their complexity is challenging too. I mean, we talk about how we want people to be more controllable and we want things to be more controllable because that makes life so much easier. What you're showing is more complexity, and that's quite challenging.
It's very challenging, and I think it's something that we've always avoided. We avoid really understanding human nature in a sophisticated way in the workplace. We do Myers-Briggs and various things, and there's nothing wrong with them. They have their place, but it's limited. It doesn't tell us the details, the nuances, the complexity of human nature, and we've never wanted to know. I think partly because it is challenging and people in the workplace, leaders, feel they've got enough to deal with without all of that. Thank you very much. But partly, I think, because we've been frightened of it. So we think, I don't really want to know that I've got an unconscious that might do its own thing, whatever I think. I don't really want to know about that. And I don't really want to know how complex my staff are and that they're bringing all of that to work. Because what am I meant to do with it? So, and I don't want to know, for instance, if I work in a university, I want to think that my students are going to learn and come out and be qualified and get great jobs. I don't want to think somebody may go on and become a criminal or a murderer, or in a hospital, I don't want to think my patients are going to die. Of course, some of them do, but it's that kind of complex, it's the lack of control that we're fearful of. So we keep trying to control. But actually, if the bosses would take more account of human nature and understand it better and bring to bear really how we thrive and what we need to thrive in the workplace, I think they'd spend less time doing some of the other stuff. So they'd probably keep staff longer, that they wouldn't have to spend as much time on recruitment, retention would be better. They would probably have to spend less time on disciplinary actions because they'd have staff more engaged, more of themselves, they'd be happier at work, they'd be thriving more. So some of the things that bosses spend a lot of time on would lessen. It's reprioritizing what we spend time on, I think.
Yes, because it makes sense. When we think about our personal interactions with people, that's just so obvious, it's almost not worth saying. It's when it becomes organizational theory and when it becomes something, management books, all of the humanity goes away and we sort of have to make it almost machine-like. I mean, one of my big hobby horses actually is this bizarre thing we have at the moment where we're trying to make humans more like machines, our systems to contain us more like machines, at the same time as making machines more like humans. Why don't we make the machines like the machines and let the humans do the humans? But I can see that actually we talked about surveillance in the workplace. This is taking the humanity out, taking the understanding of people as individuals and trying to sort of, make us into widgets that can be controlled and can be sort of dealt with in that sort of way.
I totally agree with you about machines. I think we do it because we want to control ourselves and other people. If everyone was a line of machines, we could say in 1 hour you will produce X number of these, or you will see X number of patients. We try and do that anyway, but we could do it much more, with much greater certainty if people were machines, and think of everything that we'd lose. But I think and nobody would be answering us back. We think, that's the temptation, that everything would be in our control. We'd lose innovation, creativity, all of those things. I totally agree. It's bonkers the way we try and make people more machine-like, machines more people-like. I know it's bonkers.
I mean, it is tricky too. And I say this, not really working in a large company where you've got so much pressure to deliver and needing productivity and efficiency. I mean, even in my little land with teams I've worked with, it would just be so nice if people were like machines and they just did as they were told and everything worked out neatly. So, it is, understanding that people are messy and complex and difficult doesn't help you deliver on the things that, you need to deliver. But what I love from, reading your stories is that actually it does. It really, really does. Giving people agency, giving people empowerment helps them, not surveilling them and turning them into cogs and widgets.
It does help them. It's also the thing about surveillance, and there may be good reasons for this, but I haven't found them. I don't really understand it. It seems to me that the message then you're giving your employees is, one, we absolutely do not trust you. And two, we believe that you will always try to get away with things. Whereas actually, most people want to do a good job. And if they're given trust and they're given some autonomy, they will work better. And of course, there are plenty of jobs where that's not possible. Of course, that's the case. But in the jobs where it is possible, you give people scope and they will be more creative. And you engage them with trust and you make it psychologically safe enough for them, they will work extremely well. If I felt I was had a surveillance on me all the time, I don't know what I'd do. I wouldn't work well.
No, I actually came to this work through the work I do on trust and surveillance. One of the things about trust is if you trust people first, they are more likely to be more trustworthy and to trust you back. So this is the absolute opposite. There's a great project that someone suggested that we did, which is how to cause maximum distrust. And there it is. Let's do that. Let's not trust you at all. Let's not treat you like a human being. Let's not give you any agency and empowerment. And then wonder why it's not working. But let's come back to your thoughts and views on what help does your book give to us, and what can we do if we have quite a large team. It is quite complicated, and feeling and seeing ourselves as the sort of messy, wonderful human beings that we are. Give us a hand, give us a help about what to do if we're a leader, perhaps what we're to do if a team member, what to do as a manager. Any thoughts on that for us?
Okay, so let's start with a leader or a manager. I think one of the things, and this is, it sounds trite and simplistic, but it often isn't done. Having a few spaces that don't have agendas. So a space where you just check in with your team. I'm not talking about all the time, but sometimes you just have a little space where you can ask, how is everyone? And it's not, okay, we've got 5 minutes. This is number 10 on the agenda. Quick, how is everyone? Quick, quick, quick. It's not that. It's not an agenda. We've got time. People can say as much or as little as they want, but somebody might be able to say something great like, actually, I'm having a great week. I finally solved this problem that's been annoying me for ages, and I'm feeling really good about it. And somebody else might say, I'm worried about my son, or I'm worried about my ill parent, or I'm not having such a great week because of that. Those things that are just a chance to say who we are and what's going on. I'm a bit preoccupied by whatever. A chance without an agenda to be more human. So I think making a few of those spaces available makes a difference. And really it's for managers and leaders to create those spaces. We can try as team members to also do it with each other. We can do it with colleagues, but we can't particularly necessarily create organisational spaces for it. That's one thing. I think another thing that I always suggest to people that you start with yourself. So the awareness has got to start with you. And one of the ideas that I use that comes from psychoanalysis, one of the psychoanalytic concepts is what's called the third position. And the idea of the third position, I find it really helpful, is, if you're in an interaction with someone, you're just in it. There's you and the other person. And let's say it's a difficult interaction and a difficult dynamic. You're just having this, what might be quite a difficult exchange. If you're able in your mind to take a third position, so it's not just the two of you in your mind step back and you now look at the two of you. So you're observing it, almost like watching a film. And you can look at yourself and you can think, oh God, no wonder they're really acting like that. Because I can just see my body language. It's so hostile. My words might be all right, but looking at me, I'm all stompy and, I'm giving off every message that says I'm furious and hostile. No wonder I'm not getting the reaction I want. So it's something about taking a step back. Also, the minute you take a step back in your mind, the heat reduces. So you're more able to respond with less aggro yourself because you're observing rather than just being in it. So the idea about observing yourself, not just being yourself, then you can get more understanding of your own reactions. You can see the other person's point of view, so that improves your likelihood of empathy. But also, you can see your behaviour through their eyes. And it can be difficult, but incredibly helpful. So I think that's a really helpful tip and starting place. And I think in teams and between individuals, it's about learning to have slightly more difficult conversations and realizing that they're survivable. You know, that there might be something that you're desperate to say to somebody, and you can think about, how can I say this in a way that they might be able to hear it? So saying to somebody, or saying in a team, actually, I can't bear, I loathed this team. I hate everything about this team. That's not going to go down great. But you might find a way of saying, of realizing yourself that what you find most difficult is the way you never get a chance to speak in the team. You're always the last to get your voice heard. And if you might be able to say, and it would take a lot of courage, but if you could find it possible to say, I'm finding it hard to get my voice in this team. You all talk so much and I can't get a word in edgeways and I feel invisible. How great would that be? It would change your position. Suddenly you'd be visible. It would make other people aware. It would also open the door to other people saying some of what there is difficult for them.
Yes,
So
that's
the
very powerful. I think also I liked the fact that you were talking about how leaders are doing this, because it's all very well sort of us, it's all very well us doing this, but actually this has to start from the top. You know, leaders have not to be this invincible leader who is entirely invulnerable, you know, and leaders are just like us. And I think the more we reward that sort of leadership, the better, really.
And when I was just saying about making your voice visible, I wasn't necessarily talking about a leader, but you're absolutely right. That's where I started. And it has got to start there. And actually, leaders showing a bit more vulnerability is so helpful. There's one chapter in the book where a wonderful service is being closed down, and the team I'm running a session with, I ran a regular session with the team. So that wasn't a workshop or something or anything. It's just helping to talk about what's going on. And the team, some of the team say to the boss, why didn't you tell us sooner? And the three leaders, one of them says, we were trying to protect you. We thought we could fight this. We were trying to protect you. I don't know if that was right now. And turns to the head guy and says, do you think that was right now? And he says, I thought so at the time. I really don't know now. And I thought that was great leadership.
Yeah.
It actually showed their own vulnerability. It showed that they care, and it showed that they weren't certain.
Yes. So what I thought was interesting about that story, where I read that, the leaders didn't think that people could handle the truth. And I feel that happens quite a lot, that we underestimate individuals, we underestimate people, their ability to handle the truth and to be treated like adults in a difficult situation.
I think that's true. And I also think it's incredible. I do think being a leader, as you say, is incredibly difficult. It's really difficult. And there are so many fine judgments leaders need to make. Now, it's a fine judgment when you tell and who you tell and what you tell. And I agree, people are adults and can handle things. But in this instance, everyone was going to lose their job. And I think the leaders were right to, and this is about psychological safety, so you don't want to completely discombobulate your workforce when you might not have to. They were hoping we might be able to stop this happening, in which case they don't need to know. We don't need to distress them like this. And we also don't need to upset the whole organisation if this isn't going to come about. Now, they may have waited a tad long, but I think they were right in the first place to protect staff, because they might not have ever needed to tell them. So it's that very fine-tuning judgment of, when are you protecting staff by keeping things stable, and when are you just treating them like children because you think they can't handle something or you don't want to tell them. And that's really unhelpful. But they're not easy judgment calls. And also, as in those leaders where they said, maybe we got it wrong. I don't know that they did get it wrong, but they were absolutely right to then acknowledge to the team, we might have got it wrong. And what the team saw was they cared, the leaders cared, and they'd done it for best intent. And maybe the team would have preferred them to tell them sooner, but they realised this wasn't malign. This was very benign.
And I think that's a great sort of place to end, really, which is you're talking about being kind, being honest, being open. These are not tricky things. You know, we know that this is important, and yet somehow we let all of these things going on in our heads and all of these systems we've created get in the way of that.
We do let them get in the way of that because we've dehumanized the workplace by having ever increasing systems for productivity and making more profit, etc., etc., etc. And we forget who we are and what we need to thrive.
So on that note, I think do read Gabriella's fabulous book. And if you're a leader, if you're part of a team, if you're even just working alone with associates and collaborations like myself, there's so much in there and so much richness in there about learning that, you know, remembering that we really are just people and doing our best. So thank you very much, Gabriella. Really enjoyable to talk to you and really fabulous to read your book. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Really enjoyable conversation as well. Thank you.